So when I was looking at the schedule of Wednesdays for the year, I realised that the May one fell on the 1st of May itself, May Day. And it reminded me of an experience I had, actually it's about 20 years ago now, but it stays with you. When we went, a friend of mine invited us to go to Padstow to see the May Day celebrations. This friend of mine, sadly no longer with us, was very much into something called the radical anthropology group, which turns out to be radical in the sense of no real empirical evidence required for any of these theories that they had. But he was very much into sort of folklore and how these things joined up. And we fancied a weekend away, so we all said yes and went along. And I have to say, it's one of the most extraordinary experiences of my life. And I hope I'll be able to sort of give you a sense of why. And now we're all familiar with Morris dancing and mumming and that sort of thing. And we tend to think of Morris dancers as these kind of strange old men who have an interesting hobby, but we'll steer clear of them. But the curious thing...
I was playing a band with two Morris bands.
I was once tapped for Blackheath Morris. They were doing a gig, and I was there, and one guy tapped me on the shoulder. And I obviously thought, they looked at me and thought, here's a man who clearly doesn't mind dressing up like an idiot for it.
Waving hankies in the air.
Yes, exactly. But the extraordinary thing about the May Day celebrations in Padstow is that the entire town gets involved. And this has to be seen to be believed. Because you kind of assume that for something like that, maybe the teenager would roll their eyes and say, not me, not for me. But the extraordinary thing is they all do. And I remember looking across the Market Square, and through a window I saw this kid, a sort of teenager, practicing the dance in front of a mirror. And I thought, they're not just doing it, they actually want to get it right. And it has an interesting combination of a sense of community spirit, combined kind of with a sense of something that's sort of bigger and older than anyone's individual concerns, in a slightly Lovecraftian way. So anyway, I'll tell you exactly what happens. So it all revolves around this here, which is the Obby Oss, hobby horse. Now hobby horses turn up quite a lot in sort of Morris. Trevor was saying he's been a hobby horse. The Padstow one is unusual because of this mask here. And we'll go into a bit more details about it later on. But broadly speaking, there are two of these now, and have been for about 100 years. And they each parade around the town. And they start at different times and places, and they follow routes so they don't meet each other until the very end by the maypole, where there's not exactly a showdown, but it's a symbolic one. And they're followed by trains of supporters who will dress like this, and they sing songs and they play music, and it goes on. I mean, when I went, it actually fell on a Saturday, so it just lasted the entire weekend. And there's a song they sing which I'll never forget because I heard it for 2 days. So let's go through what actually happens. So on the night before, they sing a song known variously as the morning song or the night song. You might think there's a bit of a contradiction, but it starts on the stroke of midnight, so it's technically May Day morning. And a group of people process around the town singing this song unaccompanied. And in the old days, they would have gone from house to house visiting various characters in the town, singing a verse that was relevant to them. So there's lots of them, and here's a few. So it'll be, arise, Mr. Whoever, and joy you betide, for summer is a coming today, and bright is your bride that lies by your side, the merry morning of May, and so it goes on. Now, these two I remembered, and I found them on a facsimile of an 1895 broadsheet. And I thought, isn't it interesting that on the modern Wikipedia version they don't have those? Could it be that they're considered no longer appropriate? Because this one here, arise, Mr. Somehow, I know you well are fine, for summer is a coming today. You've a shilling in your purse, and I wish it was in mine, should be were subjunctive. Wish it was in mine, in the merry morning of May. Or arise, Miss Whatever, all in your smock of silk, for summer is a coming today, and all your body under as white as any milk. In the merry morning of May. Well, I thought that, but then I realised that there's also a day song, and these verses occurred in the day song on the version on Wikipedia. So what that shows you is that, in fact, a lot of this stuff is constantly being chopped around and moved around, and we'll see more of that later on. When I was there, I don't know that I really got a sense that they were going to individual people's houses, more as a sense of going from pub to pub, where they just handed out free drinks, even though it was after midnight. But in the past, it was very much a case of going to specific people's houses. And it was really, and a lot of these these Morris things are like that, it's really a question of going to people and demanding money. So you dress up in this thing, and you go and basically demand money with menaces. And for most of the history of this thing, the money that they raised was basically for the people doing it. Most of the fund they're drinking, I suspect. You're quite right. So that's what they do on the night before, and then by this time they've decorated the whole town with flowers and garlands and boughs and withies and what have you. And at one point there was actually problems with people basically raiding gardens and denuding them of all their flowers. Just going back a bit. So the next morning, the whole thing starts for real, and the two processions start off, followed by these trains of people. And it seems, I don't know how there can be so many people in one town who can play the accordion or the drums. Well, I said the drums, it's one drum. But it's quite a powerful thing. So this is the main song. Unite and unite and let us all unite. Summer is coming today. And whither we are going, we will all unite in the merry morning of May. So yes, it's all about unity and so forth. And of course, the whole thing is essentially a fertility ritual. All of these things are.
Filth.
Well, yes. Well, yeah, we'll come to that as well. All out of your bed, I don't know how this line's supposed to scan. For summer is coming today, your chamber shall be strewn with the white rose and the red, remember those colours, in the merry morning of May. Where are the young men that now should dance, for summer is coming today? Some they are in England, some they are in France, in the merry morning of May. Where are the maidens that here now should sing, for summer is coming today? They are in the meadows, the flowers gathering in the merry morning of May. So you can kind of see what's going on here. Like a lot of these May Day things, it's essentially welcoming the summer. It's celebrating the resurrection of that which died during winter. Whether it's, to what extent it's celebrating it or hoping to encourage it through these actions, it's difficult to say, but that's really what the whole thing's about. Now I'm hoping, let's say I was there on a Saturday, and throughout the whole of the Sunday, this song would strike out from one corner of the town to another. And try it again, why not? I hardly hear the people singing because there's so many drums and accordions now. So you can make out the tune. So that's what it looks like. It literally is a street full of people with accordions and drums. I don't know where they find them all from. Yes. So the St George verse is relevant because about every few verses they'll stop singing that tune and they'll sing this one. Now I've not been able to find you a recording. It wasn't in any of the recordings I made, so I don't actually know how the tune goes. But it's quite significant in the meaning of all of this. Where is St George? Oh, where is he? Oh, he's out in his longboat on the salt sea. Oh, up flies the kite and down tails a lark. Oh, Aunt Ursula Birdhood, she had an old ewe, and she died in her own park. Oh, pretty weird, but I'll tell you what all that means in a bit. But what's interesting is that when they do this verse, all the drums and everything stops, and the horse sinks down. And initially I thought this might be in reverence or sadness for St George, but in fact it's the horse, again symbolically dying, and then being resurrected again. So this is the theme which just carries on throughout the whole thing. And the other bit of it is, this is the late edition, the farewell bit. They sing it at the end of the parade when the horse is returned to its stable. Which is a pub in the case of the Obby Oss. And they sing, and if I'm lucky, I've got a recording of this one. And I'll play you the whole thing because something interesting happens at the end, which you need to hear. I think this is the post-World War I thing. Look at the lyric. Comes significant later on.
I wonder if that's also Napoleonic, actually.
Sorry?
I wonder if it's sold as Napoleonic, that kind of stuff.
That comes into it quite a bit. Talking about the French, and I think there was a bit. Was it one of those other verses about where all the young men are out? Some are in England, some are in France. Yeah.
I kind of sense it might be.
So I think a lot of this stuff is kind of gathered from, I don't know, maybe traumatic parts of the town's history, and just kind of like accumulated together. Funnily enough, most of my information comes from this book, which was written in 1971. Although my copy has a 1999 addendum at the end. But he's quite sniffy about this because it's obviously a late edition. Well, you have at the end, they all said, "Oss, Oss, we Oss!" And some people, what does this mean? Some people say, oh, it's we Oss because it's our Hoss. But I think that's rubbish. This is a quote from John Fletcher's play Women Please, in which he talks about the Obby Oss. And he talks about its lewd wee heed. So I think it's fairly clear that the wee bit is just the whinnying of a horse. It's the sound that a horse makes. But that is their big cry throughout the whole proceedings. I'm trying to mention this because when they parade around town, they go up to Prideaux Place, which is kind of like the manor house. The Prideaux Broom family. This is a fairly rich one. This is obviously photoshopped in the corner here. I think that might be the current Mr. Prideaux Broom. This is the same place taken in 72, so not much really changes. When I went there, I'm sure there was a suggestion that each horse would go up there and they'd go in and no one outside knew what went on. Which is, a nice idea that maybe they were, channeling Cthulhu or something like that. I've not heard that repeated anywhere else, so maybe that's not normal. But yes, that's part of the official itinerary. So, as you can see, there's just huge columns of people following this horse around. They all dress in white. So once upon a time, it was just the people, the small band of half a dozen people doing it who would dress like this. Nowadays, they have huge columns of followers. As I say, there are two horses. The Old Oss, who dress in red and white. Remember the references to red and white, flowers of red and white earlier on. And if you're following the relatively new Oss, known as the Blue Ribbon Oss, and they wear white and blue. See also that they're wearing they're wearing little posies and garlands of flowers. I didn't know all these years I never knew it made a noise. This is quite fun actually, because the Old Oss, at some point in the 50s, they started adopting this piratical look with these sort of like do-rags. And this guy's obviously like a sort of biker with his Old Oss jacket. But it's quite partisan, so you heard at the end of that recording, it was Old Oss forever! So this is how most of the horse followers dress. So there's certain key characters in the parade, the first of which is obviously the horse himself. This is both of them. This is the Old Oss there, and that's the Blue Ribbon Oss. As you can see, the broadly similar design. Main difference is that the Blue Ribbon Oss has this beard of lamb's wool. I don't know why. So the costume is essentially, it hangs from shoulder straps. There's a hoop with canvas stretched over it, and then these skirts which hang down. Each of them has a sort of horse's head sticking out the front. At some point in the past, it had a sort of like a clacking jaw you could operate from inside. I'm not sure if it still does. But really the most striking thing about it, and what makes it different from Obby Oss's anywhere else, is the mask worn by the actual man wearing it. No one really knows where that came from, the design of it. It's not the original, I mean they reproduce it every few years, but they copy the design. And some people say that obviously Padstow is a seafaring town, sailors went away, brought things back from other lands. Some suggestions have been from Africa, Papua New Guinea. I mean, I think that one and these in particular, yeah, I can see that maybe. I always thought it was a little bit Maori as well in terms of the colours, but I admit these are more, it's more tendril-like, whereas the Oss is a bit more kind of rectilinear, so maybe not so much that. Who knows, maybe it did. I'm not sure if you can see it here, but on one of these, the letters OB appears on some of it, and no one knows where those initials come from. So yes, the actual body of the horse is black. Apparently that is, I read that a lot of fertility symbolism is black. So a lot of these Obby Osses are black. A lot of the idea is that a stallion is like a symbol of virility, or whatever the horse equivalent of virility is. And touching a horse in times gone by was said to be a cure for barrenness or whatever. And the tradition is that the Obby Osses will run around the town and try and catch people under their skirts. And particularly, if a young woman was caught under the skirts, she would be fall pregnant within the year. And there are stories of young unmarried women sort of like running the length of the street to avoid getting but also of married childless women, placing themselves deliberately in the way. And there is kind of a tradition of people will reach out and touch the horse, but I think everyone does that. I don't think it's a fertility thing. But here's a poor girl trying to escape being caught. And in the past, they would, I mean, now it's probably emulsion or something, but in the past it would be tar, and before that, black soot. And they would particularly cover the insides of the skirt with soot. So anyone caught would get marked black by it. And I think that's quite significant. This tradition of face blacking. It gets a bit complicated with the face blacking thing. I don't know whether it's, whether there's a kind of a racial element to it, or I think one thing that crops up a lot with these rituals is the idea of the normal way of things being inverted for one day. So pale things being dark, lowly people being uplifted to become the king of the May, or the king for a day. And there's some other examples will come up. And I really think that's probably a big part of it.
It's also anonymity, isn't it? So you can lampoon the
Yes.
Well, I think that's true. I mean, in fairness, a lot of this is about a day in which you can get away with stuff you couldn't get away with on any other day. I think there's a lot of it is just kind of random horseplay and being naughty.
Because there's something called guisers, which is disguisers.
Right.
So you would.
People are wearing masks as well.
Yeah. So you go to places that you would be known at, but you would perform a play or anything like that and get some reward without being known by, perhaps your employer or something.
And as an aside, I think the Venice Carnival, there's a tradition that you can just get away with a lot of things you can't really normally do. If everyone's wearing a mask, it doesn't really matter. So it's just, somehow, it's like, part of it is like being able to let off steam for one night of the year when things are kind of okay, which aren't normally okay. If I can get this to work, this is quite fun. As I said, there was an element of blacking people with soot. I mean, this doesn't go on anymore, but I found this video in which you can just see it happening if I can get it to work. It's 1932. Crowds are still going up there. Before that. Catching people under the skirts.
how many people were wearing hats?
Well, this was the 30s. Now I say that it's not a racial thing. It turns out that the old Oss team did have a habit after the day's festivities would go on that they would completely do blackface and play minstrel songs. So what do I know? Maybe. It's also worth bearing in mind that the word Morris apparently comes from Moorish. And I'm not really sure why. I've heard rumours that they say, that all these rituals came back with the Crusaders, but I've never heard of anything like this going on in Islamic culture. It may have come from Spain, where they definitely do have hobby horse things, so I don't really know. But yes, the element of blacking what is normal pale.
Tours, they come from like sort of where parts of the country were mining areas. If you had mining in Kent, Northampton,
I guess maybe that would be normal.
Yeah, lots of, I don't know, lots of, anyhow.
Yeah.
Commonly the use of changing your clothes, for example, is to avoid recognition. So, for example, when you wear black during mourning, the idea is that the ghost of the departed, the misfortune, they won't recognise you.
Oh.
And therefore, because you're wearing unusual clothing, and therefore they won't recognise you, misfortune won't befall you. That's why you've got a gap between the head mourners and the followers in a funeral cortege, so their shadow does not cast upon you, so the misfortune will not visit you. And of course, one might wonder why there's two Osses, the prince and his talist, your king for the day. Because of course the origins of the maypole were back to the Green Man and tying someone up and flogging them to death for the fructification of the earth. Other things were done. There are gentle ladies present. So
well, there weren't always two Osses. We'll find out.
It's Skimity ride, isn't it? In the Mayor Casterbridge thing or something like that. To lampoon the good, quote the good. I think it's the Mayor Casterbridge.
Well, what's interesting is that one of the characters is the Master of Ceremonies who wears basically morning dress. Quite hard to find pictures of him. Here he is, he's holding his hat. Here's another one here. He hasn't always been there. I think that was probably a 19th century edition, but it seems to be part of it now. Another important character is the teaser. This is a poster which we got when we went there, and this is just a blow-up of this bit here. Led by the high-stepping teaser, full of life. And it's a pretty good photograph of somebody doing it. The teaser carries a club, which you can just about see there, which is a stick with a sort of wool-filled leather bit on the end. And he is supposed to sort of leap and prance. Here's a few other examples of them. You can see that nowadays they dress pretty much like everybody else, but they carry these clubs. I think these three are all the blue ribbon Oss, and that's the old Oss, different design on the club. And the teaser's role is he kind of leads the horse, and he does do a lot of leaping and prancing, but he's also effectively teasing the horse. So there's an adversarial thing going on here. This is from 1919. I like this picture because he's doing some serious capering and prancing here. But also, there's his stick in there, and also he's wearing a mask, which was much more common back then, getting back to anonymity and all that sort of thing. And there's the Oss in the background, which has scarcely changed, to be honest. So his club, well, obviously it's a reference, it's analogous with a fool's or jester's bladder on a stick, which apparently represents a uterus, I read the other day. A lot of people say that the club is phallic, which it might be, but then, who knows. There's some Morris, again, with a similar sort of stick there. But as I say, there's a sense in which they're adversarial. And a lot of people say that represents St. George and the Dragon. Well, possibly, because obviously St. George gets mentioned in that verse that we were talking about. Another possibility I have heard is St. Petroc apparently saved the people of Padstow from a dragon, and he did it by snaring it in his girdle and leading the dragon down to the sea where it swam away. I mention that because there is that reference to St. George being in his boat on the Salt Sea, though, so it could be that. So it's a bit obscure. I suspect a lot of these things are more likely to be part of a wider body of things, and I think St. George is probably more likely. Another character is known as the Melee, which is basically a bloke in drag. They don't do that anymore, possibly because it's a bit pointless, because There's just as many women as men there, and you know, this clothing is kind of universal. But for a long, long while, this guy here, this is in the late 1940s. Seems to be the same person doing it each time. So W.H. Thomas would. This is Obby. Well, Lively Mac. I'm sure this is him too. This is basically. This is 38, and that just says 30, so it's probably the same person. Why? Well, I think the most likely explanation is getting back to what we were saying before. It's an idea of reversing the norm. Some people say that this is a specific character. If it were, Maid Marian doesn't get mentioned in any of this stuff, but in a lot of Morris stuff, she does. In Helston, where they have the furry dance and the whole pageant, Robin Hood and Maid Marian get mentioned as well as St George, possibly. Apparently, the word hobby horse actually comes from Robin Hood. Originally, it was Robin's horse. That's what they say. Is it Maid Marian? No particular reason to think that. But Aunt Ursula Burton, remember her from the St George verse? The story goes that, and this is a Napoleonic thing, that when the men were away fighting the French at sea, a French warship appears off the coast, back at Padstow. So Aunt Ursula leads the women to dress up in red capes, go along the cliff tops so that the French think that they're British soldiers. And in one version, they're led by the Obby Oss, who the French, of course, assume is the devil. And, of course, they run away. And Aunt Ursula saves the day.
Foolish French.
Yes. So she had an old ewe, and she died. She actually refers to the ewe. So the ewe died happily of old age in its own field. The point being that the French didn't get to eat it. So there's an earlier version of it, which is no longer sung anymore, where it says, "Where are the French dogs that make such a boasto? They shall eat the goose feather, and we shall eat the roasto." So the point being, the French aren't going to get to eat our ewe. We're going to eat. And the ewe's like, well, I don't care, you know. And I'm assuming the goose feather is a reference to arrows, but I'm just guessing. So yes, Napoleonic stuff comes quite a lot into all of this. But that's who Aunt Ursula is. Birdhood is a real family within Padstow, so I'm not saying that the story is real, because I think in Helston they have a similar tale, and it's the Danes that they're scaring away, so who knows. Although, I don't know whether the Danes really threatened Cornwall. But the Moors did. I think some Cornish people were actually rounded up by a Moorish ship and taken off into slavery, so that's who Aunt Ursula is. Is that the May Lady? I doubt it. I think it's a generic thing. Because I found this. This was written in 67, and I'm not quite sure what his sources are, but it does say, "The Church of the Middle Ages went through several periods of warring against such folk customs and against minstrels who sang the common or bawdy folk songs with their fertility symbols and references. All those improper gestures and disguises, the cross-dressed men, women, and the man-drunkards, and lady drunkards, covered in animal skins or wearing bestial masks. The horse dancers and the rest were a regular target of ecclesiastical." So this shows that the whole cross-dressing thing was an ingrained part of the whole thing for a long time.
Still is.
Still. So, if all of this sounds familiar to you, I'm assuming most of you have seen this, yeah?
Yeah.
This is based on Padstow. This is one of the things when I discovered that interested me. Via a novel called The Ritual, which is set in West Cornwall. But very, very much based on it. So here, obviously, we have the Obby Oss, which in the film does have a clacking jaw. No mask for the guy here. Here's Lord Summerisle dressed with a wig and a dress. This is our hero, Sergeant Howie, who has stolen the costume of another character because he believes that one of the children of the village is being kidnapped and is going to be sacrificed, and he wants to save her. So he's in disguise with a mask, much like that mask we saw from 1919 earlier on. And other aspects of it, in the film, the people all dress in animal masks, which they don't in Padstow. But in other respects, there's a lot going on there. So he's obviously the teaser there. He's got his bladder on a stick. Of course, one of the interesting things about this is that, without wanting to give too much away, he thinks that there's a group of people on the island who are going to sacrifice this girl and he wants to save her. And it turns out that everyone's in on it apart from him. So it's the entire village working quite happily together against the outsider. And that's what makes it chilling. And I think that's, getting back to what I said at the very beginning about how everyone in the whole town comes together for this one thing, I think that's possibly what the director found inspiring about this idea. This thing which to everyone else is so other, to them it's all normal. So yes, Wicker Man. Now in the Wicker Man there's this bit here where they do a sort of sword dance and everyone has to pop their head up in there. Obviously that's not part of the Padstow thing, but I did discover that a reference to, quite an old reference to May Day celebrations in general, talking about the key parts such as the May King and May Queen, the Maypole, and the Morris dances, so it said dance with swords. So obviously these sticks that we're used to are just standing in for one sword. And in fact, obviously often in Scotland they have a tradition of sword dancing, but apparently that is actually related to Morris dancing. It's kind of a variation thing. So our Morris dances were once a little bit more sinister than they appear now.
Arabia has a tradition of sword dancing at festivities.
Well,
So
maybe it's where the Moors come into it then. Who knows? And yes, the Maypole we're all familiar with, but they have one in Padstow. It used to be at Cross Street, which is at Crossroads, until somebody complained and they moved it to Broad Street where it is now. I discovered that there is a tradition of erecting maypoles at Crossroads, which kind of, well, some people goes back to a pre-Christian thing where Crossroads are often places where you make sacrifices to the gods. And I did read in one place that sometimes the maypole has a specially designed doll on it, which is meant to stand in for the child sacrifice that would previously be. I don't know. It's a little bit Wicker Man, obviously, a little bit Wicker Man. I'm pleased to say that the maypole in Padstow doesn't have that thing. It just has an image of the Oss at the top. Obviously, it used to be a shipbuilding town, so getting hold of masts wasn't that difficult. Allegedly, it was as high as 90 feet sometimes. Some people say a maypole is phallic. Could be. I mean, I'm inclined to think it could just be a tree. I mean, it's the whole thing is a fertility thing, and they've covered it with flowers and branches and things like that. So, but it's fertility related. Sap is rising. Well, that's what it's about. But it's another view of Broad Street where it is now. Oh yeah, I should mention that although I never managed to see any because I probably didn't get up early enough, but they have these little junior altars which have their own little parade. Oh, it was called. There you are.
Get it whilst they're young.
Well, exactly. So yeah, so as I say, that's broadly what happens. But what's kind of most interesting about it is this sense of the whole community coming together, and I think that's kind of what makes it unique. That and this mask as well. So historically, here are some snippets. I mean, as far back as the 4th century, this horse thing was going on. This is St Augustine saying it's bad. And I think certainly everyone within the church was horrified by it, which does kind of suggest that it's kind of pagan in its essences. Apparently in the 16th and 17th century, sort of Morris dancing, ribbons and garters were used as evidence in witch trials. You watch out. I did come across a reference to Bulgaria, I think the 19th century, possibly early 20th century, where a man was warned by his priest that if he died while wearing a horse costume, he couldn't be buried in consecrated ground. So that's kind of damning on the part of the church there.
They didn't like it, did they?
They don't like it up on. So we know that there are May Day festivities in Padstow going back at least to the 16th century, but the first record of the actual Oss was only in 1803. Although by 1824 someone had written down the lyrics of the song, so it suggests it had been going for a while. This engraving, allegedly from 1830 something, and I can't quite read it, it's quite interesting. You can see there's the Oss. It was a drum and fife back then, before they invented accordions, I guess. But another fun thing is these guys shooting pistols into the air. That doesn't happen anymore, but apparently it was quite a thing.
It still happens in Moss Sailing to scare away the evil spirits.
I know.
Wild West.
Well, I did read that up until a certain point in Cornwall, it's quite usual to fire pistols at weddings and any kind of celebration then. But also, it's a scare away. Is it scare away winter or something like that in kind of dark places, which kind of is what this is all about. And here's is a poster basically telling people not to fire guns with the fireworks, particularly on near the highway. I'm not quite sure if there was a tendency for the missives to involve kind of attacking people on the highway or not. But anyway, in 1837 you were told not to do it anymore. And here's and this, as I say, does connect, I think, quite obviously to your wassailing, where you said they used to fire guns.
Yeah.
And blow horns, which is another thing that happened in
So
Padstow.
it's party poppers.
Well, yes. Obviously, this doesn't happen anymore, but I guess scaring away evil spirits or. Yeah. During the 19th century, so we know what was going on, and this is what's interesting, is that people who wrote about it had a pretty low opinion of it. It was something done by a small group of degenerate people. 1803, where they mention it. On May the 1st, a festival is kept here which is called the Hobby Horse, from a man being dressed up in the stallion's horse's skin, led by crowds, and at every dirty pool, dipping the head in the pool and throwing out water at them. It is therefore the British festivity of May Day, observed in a manner not British. 14 years later, there's an annual jubilee kept up at Padstow on May the 1st, known by the name of the Hobby Horse, an illusion to which the inhabitants dress up a man in a horse's skin and lead him through the streets. The odd-looking animal amuses, by many whimsical exploits, the crowd which follow at his heels, particularly by taking up dirty water wherever it is to be found and throwing it in the mouths of his gaping companions. This kind of water thing was obviously, I mean, it seemed to be like the main thing back then. Completely passed out of it. Some people say, oh yeah, water, fertility, swelling the crops and stuff. Maybe. And it's always dirty water. So I do wonder whether there's just another aspect of the soot blacking. It's just like muddying people. Well, we'll come to it actually. 1824, on the 1st of May, another species of festivities pursued in Padstow. This is called the Hobby Horse, from canvas being extended with hoops and painted to resemble a horse. Being carried through the streets, men, women and children flock round it when they proceed to a place called Treater Pool, which is a freshwater pool where animals used to drink, in which the hobby horse is always supposed to drink. When the head being dipped into the water is instantly taken up, and the mud and water is sprinkled on the spectators, to the no small diversion of all. The day generally ends in riot and dissipation.
Excellent.
That's what a good day is.
So, well, yes.
Yeah.
Well, if you visit that many pubs,
Yeah, well, yes. And this from 1865 is interesting. Formerly, all the respectable people at Padstow kept this anniversary, decorated with the choicest flowers, but some unlucky day, a number of rough characters from a distance joined in it and committed some sad assaults on old and young, spoiling their nice summer clothes, covering their faces and persons with smut. From that time, 50 years since. So this is written in 65, but it seems to have been happening back in the early times. The procession is formed of the lowest. So what this is suggesting is that there was a time when it was just people wearing their finest clothes and garlanding themselves with flowers, and all this horseplay kind of came into it, and then the whole thing kind of sank down into something which was perpetrated by a small number of drunkards, and yeah, well, let's go on, we'll see.
Glad it's not like that now.
No. Well, by the 1880s, some people were actually trying to sort of change this. There's this guy called William Bluey England who repeatedly came up with the second horse, because up until this there'd only ever been one horse. It was just the horse. So he kept on coming up with new horses. And in 1881 they built the Padstow Institute, which is now where the Blue Horse is stabled, with the intention of providing a place of mental and moral relaxation for the men of Padstow, away from the evils. It was something was going on. I mean, this is the height of the Temperance movement. And in fact, one of the second horses was known as the Temperance Oss. Clearly that wasn't working that well, because in 1903 the Guardian writes, "The May Day celebrations were a disappointment in consequence of the unusual amount of drunkenness that met our eyes. Not for many years have we witnessed such sights as greeted us last Friday. Much as we respect old customs and tolerate slight deviations from everyday life, we are quite of the opinion that it would be better for the hobby horse to become a thing of the past than for it to continue and be accompanied by such disgraceful manifestations." And I think a lot of people at that time maybe felt the same way.
The Guardian's not changed.
That sounds more like the Telegraph. Oh yeah,
that makes better back then.
this is from 1897. So this to give you an idea what they're like. Again, horse much the same as it is now. There's a couple of people there. There were two women who were known as Christiana something, I forgot, and Ducker was her nickname. It was mostly men who did this throughout the 19th century. These two were known as a couple of ladies who used to get involved, which in a way goes to show how rare it was. This is 1903, so this is the year when the Guardian was complaining. But I think, yes, this is the blue ribbon off. So this would have been a relatively sober attempt. Clearly not successful on that occasion. It's in 1903. So it really changed in 1919 when men coming back from the Great War created a new second Oss, which they called the Peace Oss, or sometimes the Armistice Oss. But I think what made the difference was that they, rather than just bullying people to give them money which they'd spend on drink, they were actually raising money for charity, in this case for St Dunstan's Hospice for blinded soldiers and sailors. I think that might have been something which changed things, people's attitudes towards it. That and the fact that in the 1920s you started getting academics taking an interest in folk tradition, people like Cecil Sharp wanting to cherish, preserve and catalogue these things. So suddenly, intellectuals from around the country were taking an interest in what was going on. So that helped it become respectable. And this is round about the point where everything changed. So 1927, there's some sort of folk jamboree at the Albert Hall, and the Peace Oss went along to that, so that would have, again, raised their profile. And it was from this point that it suddenly became the all-encompassing thing that it is now, where it was cherished and respected by everyone. And gradually throughout the 20th century, it kind of got towards what it is now, to the point where, that's 1921, that incidentally, it's the same, the maypole in the same place as that shot. But it's interesting that even by 21, there are not that many people getting involved. It was just a relatively small number of people. So by the 1960s and 70s, it had become so well publicised that in fact there was a sense of resentment that there were so many tourists coming in to see what was going on. It was the sort of thing that would turn up on Nationwide, if anyone remembers that. And interestingly enough, when Robin Hardy of the Wicker Man went there, he did say that he was made to feel very uncomfortable, and the locals put up a wall of evasion about it, and that it was very unpleasant being a stranger in the town on that day. So by that stage, they were starting to resent people from outside and wanted to be just for them. And I think a decision was made to not really to publicise it anymore. I don't think it's that widely publicised now. Now, how many people here actually knew about all of this?
Well, it's appeared as famously on Rick Stein many years ago.
Well, because he lives in Padstow.
And he lives in Padstow, of course, where owns half the restaurants, half the shops.
Yeah.
And he basically featured this sort of thing and made a big deal out of it. You do wonder whether or not people basically sort of have gone as a result of having seen this, because there's nothing quite like sort of, prime time BBC Two show with showing these type of things.
But I think their efforts to sort of dial it down a bit worked, because by the time I went there, I didn't have any sense that I was resented there, and I was actually walking around carrying a microphone, recording on the evening before when they go around all the pubs and things, and they were handing out free pubs. Somebody gave me a pie and said, "Oh, one for the man from the BBC there." So they knew what I was doing and they didn't really mind. So I certainly didn't feel threatened when I was there. Yes.
The Deptford one, in the last couple of years, got really, really big, and so many people. So this year, you could hardly find anything about it. Like so they kept it to a small local sort of thing. There's still a nice crowd of people who know about it and go. But I think, with some of these things, like when I do my Watto, I can't have hundreds and hundreds of people. It's just too big. So a small gathering. But then, on the other hand, if you want to go and do something, then have your own one in your own little area and organise that and things like that. Because that's the whole thing about folk and stuff like that, tradition thing, is to do things in your own area.
So to keep you quiet, Mr. White, you basically were interviewed by the BBC, weren't you? And you appeared on television.
I did indeed.
Yes, exactly. I was the same way. This today, if you have Rick Stein basically turning up with a TV camera, basically sticking for 8 million people on Tuesday night for BBC Two, then I mean.
It was 20 years when I went.
Yeah,
so maybe it's changed.
But
certainly at the point in the 60s and 70s where there were so many people there wasn't even the room to do the dance. So, you want to say something?
Yeah, it's not usual. I'm actually from Devon, which is the county next door to it. It was on West Country Television and TSW most nights. So what they would do is they occasionally have live cameras that would go and film it. It's actually well recorded, and probably the reason why it's still maintained its popularity is because of that. So certainly they were still recording it up until this time, so you can still go down and see it.
Was this a few years ago? Or?
No, all the time I was growing up around that area, it was around about this time you'd see local TV cameras that go down there and the newspapers and so on and so forth. So it's another thing because the village Dartmoor that we used to go to the maypole dancing in was around about the same time. So you always remember it.
Yeah, indeed. But I mean, this is quite interesting because I think if that hadn't happened to him, I don't think the Wicker Man would have been made, or it's not the way that it was. Because the sense that everyone in this community knows something that and you're not part of it is diffuses throughout the movie. So this is here just because it is still risky, and in 2019, a woman actually died from being hit by the horse. I found this picture. This is crime scene tape on the. You can tell it's a blue ribbon Oscar because he's got these tricolor ribbons, and I think this must be the inside of the institute where he's stabled. The inquest wasn't until 2022. I don't know if anyone was found considerably, liable for anything, but the coroner, I did find a report where he's expressed surprise that there wasn't any one person taking responsibility for safety. So I don't know if that's changed since then, but
Trap Olympics.
it's not that they're carrying barrels of burning pitch like they do in Lewis.
Oh, yeah,
So
yeah.
it's relatively safe compared to that. A few other Rosses. There's one in Minehead here. It's not a great picture, but it's different. It's kind of boat-shaped, really. In Penzance they have something called Panglass, which means grey head. It's terrifying. I think this is more of a midsummer thing. They say this is probably based on this, Married Lewid, which again arguably means grey mare.
Is that a horse's head?
It's a skull. This looks to me like something that Terry Gilliam would come up with. But again, it goes from house to house demanding money, and it's a similar sort of thing.
You have to rhyme back to it. It talks to you, and then you have to rhyme back to it.
Right. So it's a kind of rap battle.
Yeah,
Once upon a time, they would have been all over the country. I guess there's not so many of them. Now, there's another one I want to show you. This is largely irrelevant, but it's a great picture. This is a colorized photograph from the 1920s. This is in France. This is the Tarasque, which is the head of a lion has 6 legs. It has a turtle's carapace. Apparently, it was defeated by Saint Martha, one of the saints. Anyway, that's her there holding on a. So that's not. I don't think it's necessarily related to Obby Oss. It could be. It's more to do with the town's own mythology, but it's just the front picture, really.
Actually, there is one event very, very, very similar to this. Remind me very much. In Mons, Belgium,
Oh yeah.
is the Doudou or Ducasse. And the whole city, this is about 30,000 people, get crazy in those days. It is in middle of May, and you have St. George fighting with the dragon.
Yeah.
And so the city divided with the supporters of the one or the other.
Same thing.
And the dragon that is held by kind of dozen people inside is moving around in the square on the side, and there's a long tail, and at the end of the tail there are kind of hairs, and it's kind of everybody fight, and
because
we
it
have
has the
many people injured because they try to grab those hairs, and St. George is on horse is fighting ritually around the square with the dragon, and there are support. All are dressed exactly like that, white with the red.
That's really interesting.
sash,
Yeah.
and they are following the St. George, supporting St. George, and the others supporting the dragons. And it's kind of many good people, and everybody get drunk at the end of the day, and it's a kind of very similar festivity, let's say. And it's the people from Mons, they feel like you can joke about these things. It's very serious for them. And the first time I was there, the first year, because we lived in Belgium for 7 years, and the first year was okay, yeah, it's funny. It's not funny. They get upset on me because I was like light.
The Belgians were into St. George. That's
They are
quite
very much on it.
Yeah.
It's very similar. The dragon is kind of reminded the horse because it's very big, but the St. George is on a real horse fighting around.
A real horse.
Yeah, real horse. And that is quite dangerous. And when there is one man that is helping in controlling the horse, And these people are very, very, regarded as very honor position to be the holding the horse or the St. George, and it's a tradition to always be the same people and to pass this role to a very friend. It's kind of the city itself gets praised, I think, nowadays. It's very similar.
And also the idea of grabbing hairs from the horse's tail is very similar to the idea of touching the horse. And,
yes, it's exactly the same.
Helston furry dance. I used to assume that was to do with fairies. That was just to do with the word for a fair, as in a country fair. We mentioned the master of ceremonies here. Here, the dance everyone wears morning wear, and the Howland Toads or pageant. You were just saying there. That's Sir George and the Dragon. The dragon looks a bit like Godzilla, actually. And this is the same thing in the 1930s. Nice picture, I thought. So yeah, these are some other things, and obviously they've really kept that up. So to end, this is quite fun. In 1847, this guy Thomas Tregaskis, who's a god botherer, was trying to make them all stop this. So he offered them a whole ox to consume if they wouldn't do it, and they were so outraged they printed a poster by way of reply. And I like this bit here. The bones of every Padstow boy are fired by the hobby horse. As soon as a child is able to lisp its parent's name, it will chant the glorious strains of our festival song. And it will usher in May's first merry morn with the summer and the Mayo. Well, that's what I'd leave on that note.
Very well.
Thank you very much. Go if you can.
For Padstow to have one slightly exciting festival is one thing, but they also have something that's affectionately known in the olden days as Darky Day. Have you never been tempted to go and visit that as well?
I was going to mention that at the end of the ceremony, certainly back in the early 20th century and late 19th century, the old horse team would black up and sing darky songs and go around to them. So I don't know if that's what you were referencing.
Well, they have another day that they basically do sort of they used to do with mothers things.
Well, yes, it's kind of. And I've seen pictures of modern.
Yeah, I mean, also features
Morris troops where they just black their faces completely. I'm amazed they can get away with it nowadays, but.
No, they've rather declined doing that at the moment.
Well, you can see why.
Or they've changed the colour to dark blue.
I've seen one where it's blue. Yeah. Yes.
Just say you could have cut all this short and just said it could all come up on Sunday and join the Flannels Walk. It's a pub crawl.
You think we should have an Obby Oss at the Flannels Walk?
Good stuff.
Interesting idea.
Good stuff. Look good in the frock.
I see him as Lord Summerall, yeah.
They should bring the foreigner back symbolically wearing a spares and just shout at it.
Yeah, again, it belongs to a different time.
No. Certainly not.
Okay, well, that's the end of that.
Very well.